So I made a poll asking everyone what they wanted my next video to be, and the people answered. They want the same old bullshit that I gave them last time. Well, who am I to deny the people? If you guys all want recycled garbage, then open wide. Dad is coming to serve. All right, this should be pretty obvious. It says part 2 on the title. Haven't seen part 1? You may want to go see part 1. In that beginning, I give a detailed description of everything you need to know about the Cult of the Lamb universe so that you can understand what exactly these survivors are going up against. If you already know about Cult of the Lamb, don't worry, just keep watching this video. But if you don't know anything about it, go check out that first video, get some updates, because I'm not going to keep reiterating the same shit in every single video. And also, you might just want to see that video. There's a lot of cool stuff in there. You know, in that one, they got things like Hollow Knight, Shovel Knight, Castle Crashers, Binding of Isaac. Just a bunch of cool characters show up in that one. There's like 8 characters in that one. It's way too long. I'm not doing that again. Only 4 characters for this one. All right, I think that's enough of an intro. Let's get started. Well, sort of. Apparently, my last 2 videos lit a fire under the asshole of every single person that has ever played Hollow Knight in the history of the world. And after 2 detailed videos of talking about it, they're just not done. They just want to keep arguing. Well, I don't feel like arguing this shit forever, but there are a couple of things that I missed, and I'm gonna touch on the things I missed, and then I'm never gonna talk about it again, okay? I am done with Hollow Knight after this. Probably. I ain't fucking psychic. So one argument that people brought up in the comments that I didn't really think was relevant because I didn't see how the knight had any way of actually doing this. But it is true that the lamb has a pretty significant weakness, which is if you kill all the people devoted to him and he has no one devoted to him, after 3 days, he drops dead. His power comes from the people who are devoted to him, and without them, he cannot exist as a god. So that is one way that the knight could kill the lamb. My argument originally for that was that, well, the knight has no way of even knowing that that's a way to kill the lamb. So it's not relevant, so I just didn't bring it up. But a couple people in the comment section did convince me that no, it actually is pretty possible. For one, the knight does have the ability to read minds, so it is possible that he can read the lamb's mind and find out that weakness and then try to do it. And even if he couldn't, which is possible because the lamb is a very powerful psychic, so it is possible that he could just stop the knight from actually looking into his mind, the knight could probably just figure it out, as that's the exact same way the Absolute Radiance's power worked. In Hollow Knight, the Absolute Radiance started losing her power when she started losing followers, so her power works the exact same way. And in the story of Hollow Knight, the knight does eventually destroy all of Godhome and kill a ton of different innocent people while he does that. So not only is it possible that he could just assume that that's how the lamb's power works, but he also has the moral ambiguity. I don't know what you would call it. Like, he's not morally good or evil. He might actually go through with killing a bunch of innocent people in order to get rid of the lamb if he sees the lamb as that much of a threat. So those arguments basically got rid of all of my reasons for not bringing up that weakness, because I just didn't think the knight could or would go through with that. But congratulations, y'all convinced me. It still doesn't matter though, and that's for a couple of different reasons. For one, the lamb does have a very weak form of omniscience. Essentially, anytime one of his followers has literally anything happen to them, he is aware of it. This is something that's a part of gameplay as well as the lore of the game. In gameplay, it takes the form of notifications where the lamb is always aware if one of his people are dying, or if they're starving to death, or if they're dissenting and causing a bunch of problems at the camp. He is basically always aware of what's going on with his followers. There's also several instances of other gods, like the bishops or the one who waits, just knowing things that are going on the island even though they're not there to witness it. Like, the one who waits is in a prison dimension nowhere near the island, and every time he talks to you in the game, he keeps talking about all the stuff that's going on the island as if he can witness it, despite the fact that he's nowhere around it. He should not be capable of seeing it. So basically, the moment the knight tries to do this, the lamb will be aware it's happening and will be able to take the proper actions in order to stop him from doing it. But let's just say that that won't help, and the knight does succeed in killing all of the lamb's followers. Well, it still takes 3 days for the lamb to die. And if you've ever played Cult of the Lamb, you know that 3 days is more than enough time to get like 10 or 15 new followers easy. So let's say the knight goes one step farther and he goes, all right, I'll just wipe out all life on the island so you can't possibly get more followers. Everybody, the whole island, they're all dead. Well, the lamb is a god of death that often resurrects his followers. And like I said before, he has 3 days to do so before he drops dead of not having followers. So you see where I'm coming from? It's just very unlikely that the knight will be able to kill the lamb in this way. Even if everything goes his way and the lamb has nobody else, he can still find ways of recouping those followers. And even if he couldn't recoup the followers, the lamb still has 3 days to fight and kill the knight before he drops dead. Look, a fight between these two characters is going to end with a fight, not some cop-out way of just slaughtering all of the followers and just fucking off. It's just not going to happen that way. It is super easy for the lamb to get followers. He has several ways of doing it. All right, last point before I move on to the topic of this video. I never brought up the dream nail, and that is my bad. The knight has the dream nail, which allows him to essentially open up a portal into someone's mind, and he can jump into their mind, into this sort of dream world-like landscape within their head, and then fight them there. In this world, the knight is significantly more powerful, and if he kills you in your mind, you die in the real world. It is a completely viable option that the knight has that, for whatever reason, I just didn't talk about. Honestly, the knight has enough powers and shit that I could have made it just its own video. Really, the problem was me sharing it with 8 other characters in a single video. But regardless, I'm not so sure this would be as useful as you guys think. For one, the lamb is an extremely powerful psychic. He has telekinesis, mind control, he can indoctrinate people instantly. I mean, his whole thing is dominating the minds of others. The lamb has a very powerful mind. So I wouldn't be so sure that going in and fighting him in his mind would be the best idea. He might very well be more powerful there than he is in the real world. It's sort of like a Professor Xavier thing, right? Would you rather challenge Professor Xavier to a boxing match, or would you want to jump in his head and fuck with him mentally? You probably don't want to fuck with him mentally. Same situation for the lamb. And I don't know if the knight has fought a psychic quite as powerful as the lamb in his own game. There are people who mess with other people's minds in the knight, but not quite to the extent that the lamb does. So he might actually be the most powerful psychic that the knight has ever faced. I do think there'll be a bit of a learning curve because the lamb has never actually fought inside of his own mind before, so he might not really know what's going on or understand what's happening. But the game shows that he's an extremely fast learner. Like, he picks up a weapon he's never used before and instantly masters it. He's pretty quick on the draw. So while I think the knight might get a couple of minutes of the lamb not really understanding how to fight in a dream world, you can use hints from the Cult of the Lamb series to kind of come to the conclusion that he'll figure it out pretty fast, and then the fight will just boil down to basically the same type of fight you would have in the real world, except now you just have 2 very powerful mental characters having a mental battle instead of having like a physical one in the real world. So no, even after these 2 arguments, I'm still not convinced that the knight would beat the lamb. It is what it is. I'm sure I'll hear more arguments down below. Moving on to the video. All right, first up we have Wilson from Don't Starve, and this one's kind of a cheat because we already sort of have an answer for this. So in case you didn't know, Cult of the Lamb and Don't Starve had a crossover where basically the lamb entered a portal and went into the Don't Starve universe and interacted with Wilson and all this kind of stuff. In the Don't Starve games, you got a bunch of cool special islands that they got from the lamb, but in the Cult of the Lamb universe, they actually had a little bit of a storyline. So Weber is a character in Don't Starve together, and he basically has all the same powers and abilities as Wilson. He has like a couple other things, like he can control spiders and shit, and Wilson has a couple things that he doesn't have, but nothing that'll really turn the tide here. They're basically the same character physically. Anyway, Weber entered the portal and went to the lands of the old faith, and we don't know exactly how it happened, but he died. The lamb finds his skull, finds it interesting because he's never seen anything like that, resurrects him, and then instantly indoctrinates him like the moment he comes to life. So that basically answers our question to what exactly would happen if Wilson ran into the lamb. He would become instantly indoctrinated. We don't even really need to discuss that part further. However, this video is not about what characters can take on and defeat the entirety of the Cult of the Lamb universe. It's who would survive on the island. And as far as that goes, I actually think Wilson has a shot. For one, Wilson is a lot older and a lot more experienced than Weber. So yes, Weber did die when he entered the lands of the old faith after an unspecified amount of time, but I don't think the same thing would happen to Wilson. He's quite a bit smarter than Weber. He's older than Weber. He's more experienced than Weber. I just think overall he would make a lot better and, quite frankly, smarter decisions than Weber did. Now, Weber does have some things fighting against him. As far as his physical power and defense goes, he doesn't even really come close to the absolute weakest cultists on the island. So in Don't Starve, it takes Wilson about 6 hits or so with your basic pickaxe to break a rock that's about the same size as him, while the cultists are capable of destroying those same rocks in a single hit. So clearly they're stronger. Now, Wilson is capable of having stronger strikes if he upgrades his weapons and gets better stuff, and since this is endgame Wilson, he will be able to close that gap. But this is very much a situation where a far weaker character needs all of this extra equipment just to stand a chance against even the weakest dudes. But here's where I think Wilson actually has an advantage though. Wilson, unlike a lot of other characters that are on this list and the previous one, is not a warrior. He's not here to save people. He's not here to specifically go after and fight people. He's not even really a fighter. He fights to survive. His main point, and the main point of the game in Don't Starve, is to survive. Wilson's only interest is scientific intrigue. He likes to explore and learn things and build things. That's what he enjoys, not fighting and warring and all that kind of shit. So he doesn't really really have a reason to become the cult's problem. They will still attack him on sight just for being a heretic and not being a part of the cults. But if he's not going out of his way specifically to interact with them, I don't think it's going to be that much of a problem. Wilson is very good at living off the land, building stuff, creating shelter, making fires. He can live in the woods for a very, very long time without ever having to really need the cults or the society at large. He can live on his own out there. The biggest issue he's going to have is his scientific curiosity. He just won't be able to help himself from exploring the island. Having said that, the way you play Don't Starve is you start off on an island, you start building stuff, you get a couple of things, you go off to explore. Oh, you run into a giant monster you can't fight yet? Let's not go that way. Let's try to survive a little more. Let's build up. Let's go back now. We can take out that monster. And while you can say, yeah, just because that's the way you play the game does not mean that that's a part of Wilson's personality, I think it makes sense that it would be. In the canon of Don't Starve, Wilson survived in several different locations against monsters who were considerably more powerful than him. Not only did he eventually overcome a lot of these monsters, but he also thrived on these islands. He would not have been able to survive any of these situations if he was just recklessly gunning it out into the woods to try and explore shit for his scientific curiosity. He is curious, but he is also cautious, and that's actually going to help him quite a bit on this island. So if Wilson is cautiously exploring the lands of the old faith, not getting into fights unnecessarily or looking for fights to get into, and is learning things about the island as he goes across it, discovering things like magic and all the different stuff that the island has and taking advantage of it, he could actually get really far. He's never going to get to the point where he could fight the bishops or the lamb, but I don't ever think he's going to want to do that. He will be able to get to the point where he excels among the cultists, and he'll never really be a big enough threat for the bishops or the lamb to even need to worry about. And he will be able to use and weaponize a lot of the resources that he finds on this island that he has never been able to find before on other islands, that would grant him powers and abilities none of us have ever seen him wield before. And if he ever does slip up and get killed by one of the cultists, he has the power to come back. Once Wilson dies, he turns into a ghost and can like travel around the world without being touched or seen by anyone, and then can just bring himself back from the dead. And again, as long as he doesn't run into the lamb or the bishops in this ghost form, they're not gonna like suck his soul out and destroy him or some shit. He'll be fine among the cultists. They won't be able to do that to him. There's no evidence that the cultists can like steal souls. Honestly, I think one of the most likely scenarios with Wilson is that he will go to the lamb on purpose and willingly join the cult so he can more freely explore the island without fear of death and use the resources that the lamb has. He will be way over his head because I don't think he'll realize that the lamb will indoctrinate him by force, or that the lamb is even capable of using magic to indoctrinate him by force. But regardless, I think he'll live. I think he will be okay. He'll probably survive for quite some time before anything really bad happens to him. Now, there is the possibility that once he joins the lamb's cult, the lamb like sacrifices him for more money or some shit. But you know, there's nothing you can do about that. That shit just happens sometimes. So yeah, the first character on this list, and we've already arrived at someone who I think would actually stand a decent chance at surviving on the island. And he's the weakest character on the list. That's pretty cool. Next up, we have the Beheaded from Dead Cells. And right off the bat, I want to say that the Beheaded is going to be one of the most skilled fighters on the island, hands down. The vast majority of the cultists do not have any physical fighting skill. They're just like regular people who grab blades and run around trying to kill heretics. It's not until you start getting to the mid and high tier cultists that you start to see actual sword skills and even magic affinity. But it's not like the Beheaded hasn't faced people who have sword skills in the past and in great numbers, so I don't think this will be much of an issue for him. You also have the fact that we're using the strongest version of the Beheaded, so he's quite a bit stronger than the cultists, and at that point he's capable of like liquefying an entire person with one swing of his weapon, whereas the weakest cultists are capable of breaking a rock that's a little bit bigger than they are in one hit, like break it into little pieces. I did a little bit of research and realized that breaking a rock at that size would be the equivalent of destroying like a small building, whereas liquefying a fucking person is like the equivalent of destroying a large building. Basically, it requires 4 to 5 times more power in order to liquefy a human being than to break a rock of that size. While the mid and higher tier cultists are stronger than the base cultists, I don't think that their strength increase is that significant. So I really don't see the Beheaded having any issues with any of the cultists at all. The bosses are a different story though. They are significantly stronger than the cultists and probably more powerful than the Beheaded as well. Some of them are shown doing things like breaking the solid stone ground in the diameter of like a house and actually burrowing through it and traveling through it underground. And that's some of the weaker level bosses. That is considerably more than just 4 or 5 times more powerful than the regular cultists. On top of that, these bosses have a lot of different magics and the ability to summon enemies and all kind of different stuff that I think will be a problem for the Beheaded. Despite all that, I still see the Beheaded winning. I mean, it's not like this would be the first time he's taken on people significantly stronger than himself and come out on top through just sheer sword skill and patience. As long as he can dance around them and avoid getting hit, because if he does get hit, it will be the hardest he has ever been hit in his life, he should be okay with whittling them down with his entire arsenal that he will be having access to in this scenario. Now, sadly, beyond this point, when you start getting to the gods of the world, he doesn't stand a chance physically or through hacks. He just gets completely outmatched. Now, despite everything I just said, he does have some pretty serious weaknesses that will hinder him from properly surviving on the island. So unlike a lot of other roguelikes where in the game, when you die, you lose all your stuff, but that's really just a gameplay mechanic, kind of like in Skull. Like when you die, you lose access to all your skulls, you have to reclaim them. But there's really no explanation in the lore as to why that happens. Like you still have all of your items and a lot of your other stuff that you did in each run, so why do you lose access to your skull? When you come back to life, your body just reforms completely, including your head. Everything just comes back. So why would you lose access to the head you had when you died? It doesn't make any sense, and it's simply there for game mechanics, because it wouldn't be a roguelike if you didn't have to start over at the beginning of every run. By the end of Skull the Hero Slayer, it's very easy to argue that in the lore he has access to all the skulls and all of his powers. And the exact same thing goes with the Lamb. The Lamb stores all of his items and weapons inside of the crown. The crown actually turns into his weapons. During each individual run, you can only pick one weapon at a time, and you can only use that weapon throughout that whole run until you find another weapon. But outside of the dungeons, we see the crown turn into all sorts of objects. It turns into weapons and tools and pickaxes and shovels and all kinds of different shit. So there's really no reason why he can't just turn it into any weapon. It's solely a gameplay mechanic because this is a roguelike. But for the Beheaded, you can't make that argument because this is specifically written into the lore that he loses everything after death. So the Beheaded isn't actually the character that you see. The Beheaded is just this small clump of cells that is essentially puppeting a dead body. And once the dead body becomes so fucked up that he can't puppet it anymore, he jumps out of the dead body and then goes and finds another dead body and controls that. The vast majority of his powers in each run come from mutations that he gives to those bodies, those individual bodies. And when that body dies, he has to jump into a completely new body and start over. He can't bring the mutations with him because he's just that clump of cells. He's not mutating himself, he's simply mutating the dead body that he's jumping into. This goes the same for weapons and everything else. So while I am sending the Beheaded to the island at his absolute strongest, where he has all his mutations and weapons and access to all that stuff, if he dies once, he will lose access to every single mutation, and he will have to jump into a new body, a new dead body that's laying around him somewhere, which will likely be a dead cultist, and his strength levels and everything else will just be equivalent to whatever that cultist's body is capable of. Now, while he could probably go to the location that his body died and recollect his weapons, he will not be able to recollect his mutations. You can't take genetics out of a person and put him into himself. He doesn't have that ability. So while I'm sending him to the island with all of his abilities, he's only going to have them for his first life. So if he dies at any point, from that point on, he's fucked. Because he's going to lose all of his advantages, all of his powers, even his strength boost above the other cultists, and he's just going to be equal to them. And the difficulty of him surviving on the island is going to increase tremendously. And since the source of all his power is mutations and science that exists from his world and does not exist in Cult of the Lamb, he has no way of repowering back up using those mutations. Mutations don't exist in Cult of the Lamb. He'll just be stuck at that power level forever. Basically what I'm saying is realistically, he only has one life. And while I don't think that'll be an issue most of the time, because I don't think the cultists are really capable of killing him or putting him down, I think he's skilled enough to take them all on. If a boss hits him one time, if he slips up once, their strength advantage above him is enough to kill him in a single strike. And if that happens, he is getting booted down to square one, and he will not be able to rise up from it. Now, I do know that one of the mutations he has is regeneration, and you can argue that, well, because he has regeneration, he can never really die. That's not true. It's very minor regeneration, and it is stated in the lore that he can fight with a body until it gets to the point that it just can't function anymore. And the regeneration can't come back from the ridiculous amount of damage that the body takes in his own game, and it certainly isn't going to come back from being hit by attacks that are multitudes more powerful than anything that exists in his game. So while I think he is capable of taking on and beating every single person below the gods on the island, I give him like a 65-35% chance of beating all the bosses, of which there are like 12 of them bitches. And even with a 35% chance of losing, if you flip that coin 12 times, the chances of getting hit once actually increases quite a bit. So while I think he'll do really well and it will take quite a while for him to actually be put down, I do think eventually he will be put down and he will be stuck on the island as a basic bitch cultist pretty much forever. forever. Another big problem with survival that he's going to run into is the fact that all of his abilities and powers come from scientific means as opposed to Cult of the Lamb, where it all comes from magic. Now, you'd think this wouldn't cause that many problems, but it actually does. The fact that Dead Cells is entirely science-based and all the powers come from mutations and technology means that he doesn't have an answer for the vast majority of magical-based attacks that exist on the island. Even things like his resurrection won't be as useful as you might think it would be. On the surface, his resurrection sounds really good, right? He's just a bundle of cells that controls a dead body. As long as a single cell of that bundle of cells exists, he can reform, find a new body, jump into it, and control that new body. Sounds damn near impossible to actually destroy him. But how is that bundle of cells going to deal with things like being mind controlled, having your soul ripped from your body, having all of your little cells that can normally regenerate completely transmogged into a totally different creature that can't regenerate, being cast into a hell dimension? Despite its insane ability to survive physical attacks, it doesn't have an answer for any of this stuff. So you have two choices for the beheaded. Either one, he meets the lamb and the bosses and they kill him fucking instantly or indoctrinate him and he has no defense for it. Or he never runs into them and just fights all the cultists and bosses until he eventually gets one shot and died by one of the bosses, and then he's just stuck jumping into different cultist bodies for the rest of his life. So which one is more likely? And for that, we have to look at the beheaded's personality. Who is he as a person? He's shown in his own game to not like cruelty and to really despise cruelty and even go out of his way to stop it. His goal in Dead Cells is to bring change to the crooked and corrupted world that he finds himself in, the world he comes from, the world of Dead Cells. So there really is no reason to believe that he wouldn't go out of his way to try to stop the insane level of corruptions that exist in the Cult of the Lamb universe. And if he goes about it in the same way he did in Dead Cells, which he was successful at, sort of, I'm not going to spoil the end of the game, he will be putting himself in the line of the most dangerous and powerful people on the island. That would include the bosses that could one-shot him, or the bishops and the lamb that would kill him. So no, as much as it pains me to say, because I actually like this one quite a bit, he's gonna fucking die here. I don't really see any pathway forward where he doesn't. Next up, we have Zagreus from Hades, and boy, do I have some bullshit to go through for this one. I played through all of Hades, good game, I liked it. I remember all the boons and stuff, and I remember he has a lot of cool powers, like he can charm people, and he can increase his power, he can decrease the powers of others, he's got like a lot of cool stuff. But I don't recall him being all that physically powerful. Like, he was a really skilled warrior who even surpassed that of Achilles, the greatest warrior of all of Greece, but I don't recall him like destroying some massive thing with a punch or anything like that. So I started doing research into it, and I found that a lot of people seem to agree on the fact that he can destroy a star. What fucking game were you guys playing? I started reading into it, and basically they came to the conclusion that because Helios is like a living sun, and he should be equivalent to that of Helios, he should be able to destroy a star because he should be able to fight against Helios, who is a star. And that's not true. So in the game, it's explained that Helios' chariot basically creates light for the entire planet. Like, no matter where he is, his chariot creates day. And the light that protrudes from it is so powerful, it covers the entire surface of the planet, which also means the planet in Hades is flat, because how do you cover light around a planet? It would have to be flat for that to be possible. The world is flat. Not relevant, but interesting. But there's also a story that's talked about in Hades where Helios comes down to Earth and his chariot is so bright it's blinding all the people of Earth. So Demeter creates a blizzard that covers the entire planet and covers his chariot and blocks that light. Are you seeing an issue with him being the sun yet? For one, if he was the sun, he couldn't go on the fucking planet. He would burn everyone alive, and the sun is like thousands of times bigger than Earth. So how is he the sun? And the light he protrudes can be covered by snow. I don't care if it's enough snow to cover an entire planet. It's fucking snow. The sun is a giant ball of flaming gas that's thousands of times bigger than Earth. Helios' chariot is not the sun. It's just really fucking bright. And then some slightly more reasonable people were saying that he should be able to destroy multiple continents because Demeter is able to not only create a blizzard that covers the entire planet, but also freeze all of the oceans of the world. And Hades should at least be the same level of strength that Demeter is, if not more. But that also doesn't make sense because creating a blizzard that covers the world and freezing all the oceans of the world is not the same as destroying a fucking continent. These powers are impressive because they have massive area of effect. Like, the ability to create a blizzard of that size and covering that much area is impressive, but it's not a feat of destruction. It's not a feat of physical force. Unless you can prove that she can take all of the energy it would require to freeze the oceans and then pack it into her fist and punch you in the face with it, that is not a feat of applying force onto an object. So you can't take that as a physical feat of destruction. It's the same with characters like Storm from Marvel. Storm can create a storm across the entire planet. But you can still walk up and stab her in the face with a pocket knife and she'll fucking die. She can't take all that lightning energy and put it into one single physical attack. She can do a really big lightning bolt and hit you with it, but it's not going to be equivalent to that whole storm across the whole planet. This is my issue with these kinds of arguments. You're trying to take a feat that is not destruction, not force, not even an attack, and then like recycle that energy and pretend like they can use that energy in a scientific way to like physically attack an individual. That's not how the power works. And this is the case throughout the entire game. They say that Hades should be equal to Zeus and Poseidon. Zeus and Poseidon are stated in the game to have authority over the heavens, the earth, and the oceans. That's cool. They could probably control water and shit. Awesome. Where is the evidence that they can use this to like destroy an entire country or continents? They don't do that in the game. They don't even say in the game that they created all of the universe. That's never stated. I know that they should be this powerful in Greek mythology, but we're not using characters from Greek mythology. We're using characters from a video game called Hades that were based on characters from Greek mythology. So you have to use the feats that they have in the game. At the end of the game, when Zagreus fights Hades, there's a bunch of these big stone columns. There's smaller stone columns that are about the same size as a person, and there's bigger ones that might be the size of, say, like the truck part of an 18-wheeler. Not the bed, just the truck. And while you're fighting Hades, you can destroy these little columns, and so could Hades. You can just like dash attack right through them, and he destroys them when he starts firing shit at you and trying to hit you with a spear. The big columns that are on the level, though, you hit those and they shake the same way the small columns do, but they don't break, regardless of how much you hit them. The developers specifically designed it so that you can break the small columns, but neither you nor Hades can break this bigger column. So I'm supposed to believe that Zagreus, who cannot break a column that's about the size of the truck part of an 18-wheeler, can destroy multiple continents or a fucking star in the sky? Based on what? Things need evidence, guys. You guys are doing fucking Olympic level mental gymnastics to try and make this shit work. It doesn't. Despite having the title of demigod, Zagreus isn't all that powerful. So how would he do on the island? Well, because he's capable of breaking through rock with his fist that's about the same size as him, he should be comparable to the cultists. He's also the most skilled fighter on the island, considering he was able to overcome Achilles pretty easily. Achilles actually admits that Zagreus has surpassed him. Zagreus also has a really good ability of learning things very quickly, as when the game starts, he's not that skilled, and even Achilles says that his ability to absorb information and adapt from that information is extremely impressive. Like in hours, he can learn things that would take months for other people. So when he arrives at the island, I think he's going to do just fine against all the cultists, and he will learn very quickly how the island works, as well as possibly even use some things on the island to his advantage, like possibly learning forms of their magic and stuff like that. However, in terms of physical power, he's not touching the bosses at all, not even a little bit. I was surprised to see that he doesn't actually have that many hacks, like period, and the ones he does have is resisted by the boss monsters and anything above that on the island. So in terms of hacks like powers and physical strength, he's very underwhelming here. So why did I put him here on the list? Well, he has a whole lot of hacks resistance. He basically resists every power that the lamb and the bishops had. Well, almost every power. Everything from soul manipulation to mind manipulation to curse manipulation and you name it. He has some kind of resistance towards it for the most part. And he's also fast as fuck. He can easily blitz pretty much everybody on the island, even the lamb really. So while his powers won't really help him to defeat any of the bosses or the lamb or the bishops, they will help in keeping him alive. The only way that Zagreus can really be killed here is if he slips up and gets hit by someone, because their damage output is way higher than his durability, which again is unlikely because of his speed, although it is possible. Or if someone uses a hacks that basically ignores his speed. You guys are gonna hate me, but we gotta dip into the transmog power again. I'm sorry, I don't mean to do this, but fuck, it's the only power that Zagreus clearly doesn't resist, and it's one of the only powers that the lamb uses that isn't a projectile. It just instantly happens to the person in his vicinity. So dodging it isn't a possibility. And like a lot of other characters that I have on these lists, Zagreus is a very heroic type character who will not just sit around and allow the corruption to just flourish on the island. He's going to feel a duty and responsibility to stop it and go out of his way to do so. This is going to put him directly in conflict conflict with the higher-ups of the island. And for the most part, he'll be able to skip back and forth across the island without any fear of being hurt or killed. Even the bishops, who he's not capable of actually killing, aren't really capable of killing him either. He's faster than they are, and he resists all of their hacks. And they don't have transmog like the lamb. So basically that means only one person on the whole island is capable of killing him, and he's only capable of killing him by using one power. And this was kind of the same case with the Knight from Hollow Knight. The main difference here is that Zagreus is significantly weaker than the Knight from Hollow Knight. The Knight could actually stand up against the lamb and have a decent fight. Zagreus really can't. For the most part, he just has to run away and try to not get hit, which means he's on a timer. He's gonna fight against these people pretty much forever, and eventually they're gonna hit him with something that could kill him. Whether that be he gets distracted and gets hit by one of their attacks, or he just gets transmogged, one of the two. Look guys, I'm not happy about transmog working on everybody either. I don't like spamming the same thing over and over. It just happens to be that so few characters actually have a resistance to that power. I didn't know about this shit when I picked who was gonna be on the list. I swear I looked through Zagreus' powers multiple times. I tried to find something, but he resists pretty much everything else. So transmog it is. And the last thing before we move on that really hurts Zagreus is the fact that he resurrects in the game because the game takes place in Hades. So when he dies, he just wakes up back in Hades, like Hades as in hell. But the Lands of the Old Faith isn't Hades. It's not hell. He's not going to just resurrect there. He doesn't actually have legitimate resurrection. He has this item that allows him to resurrect a total of 3 times, but after the 3rd time, he's fucking dead. He's going to go back to Hades, or I guess since this is a different universe called the Lamb, he would just go to whatever afterlife exists here. I don't know if he can jump multiple universes to go back to Hades and resurrect like he does in his game. Because in his game, he's tied directly to Hades. That's what they say. Every time he dies, he will always go back to Hades. So yeah, while his ability to survive here is actually pretty high, like a lot of these characters, his more heroic personality and his need to have to stop evil is gonna fuck him in the long run. Goddamn, Zagreus, you almost made it. All right, we're on the last one. And would you look at that? We aren't at the 40 fucking minute mark. You see what happens, Rouga, when you pace yourself? We probably could even beat him this time if we didn't have that whole Hollow Knight section. This is good. This is gonna be good. So last up, we got Akamoto from Skulls of the Shogun. So Akamoto is actually a very interesting choice to put on this island because he's not like a single character. He's like sending an entire force to the island that will become a problem for pretty much everyone there. So Akamoto throughout the game of Skulls of the Shogun is a general. By the end of the game, he becomes a shogun, the shogun of the dead, basically the ruler of the afterlife, and he's kind of a dick. Like the moment he becomes a shogun of the dead, he deems it that only the strong could enter the afterlife, which was a rule he just like pulled out of his ass. Basically, when he takes over, he demands that everybody have to fight and prove their worth in combat. They can then come in and join his army and all that good stuff. Because you see, Akamoto is a warmongering conqueror. He lives for war. He is a extremely talented battle commander and strategist. And every single boss in the game of Skulls and the Shogun are other generals who have their own armies who are all fighting to be the next shogun. Akamoto ends up overcoming all of them, including the previous shogun, and taking over. Throughout the game, as he goes through it, he is killing people, eating their skulls to obtain their power, as well as recruiting more people from the afterlife into his army. By the end of the game, he has this massive fucking army that rivals that of the shogun of the afterlife. And he beats the shogun in a sword fight, the shogun who is respected and feared by the gods. After beating the shogun, he eats the shogun's skull and obtains the shogun's power and becomes so powerful that just from a burp, he shakes this entire fucking platform that you see here on the screen right now. Just from a fucking burp. I have no idea what he can do with a sword swing, but if that's from a burp, this motherfucker is powerful. So what exactly would Akamoto coming to the island even look like? Basically, he would look at this new land that he finds himself on and instantly decide that he needs to take this shit over, and then would work towards that goal. He will start off in this world significantly more powerful than anybody, even the bosses, probably only being able to be faced by the bishops or the lamb. He will then, just like he did in his own game, begin to start recruiting people that he finds, probably ex-cultists, in order to work for him and fight for him. And then, and this is the interesting part, Akamoto has the ability to summon forces from special shrines. And when he gets these cultists, he's going to set up a camp, a military camp, have them build these shrines, and then just start summoning his forces from the afterlife to come to the island. These forces will be everything from undead soldiers, who, by the way, also have the power to eat skulls and get more powerful, but he can also summon special spirits as well as Onis. Onis are these massive ogre-like demon things that don't really listen to anyone. Like, he can't control them. He just sort of lets them go into the ether, and they just randomly start attacking people. He uses them them a lot for war, but he needs to be very thoughtful on where it is he summons them and when. But like I said, tactics is like his main thing. The spirits he can summon are pretty cool. He's got a raven that can control the weather and wind and shit like that. And he has this fox spirit that can heal people. He has a salamander spirit that controls fire. Like, he just has all of these different spirits that have all these different cool little powers. So if I were to think about how he would do on the island, it's kind of a toss-up, because if he's left to his own devices, he could essentially just take over the whole fucking island until the bishops and lamb decide to stop him. But if they do decide to stop him early on, before he can build a fucking army, which is possible they will, because they all have omniscience. Well, a small form of omniscience. They know what happens across the island. They'll know that he's building the army in the first place. I'm not 100% sold that the lamb will actually do anything to him unless he invades his territory, because the lamb doesn't really care about anything but his territory. And Akamoto doesn't really care about all the corruption and evil that happens on the island. He's not a hero. He has no interest in stopping it. He wants to take that shit over. And Akamoto is definitely smart enough to see his situation, see what he can do and can't, and act appropriately. As far as everyone that I've put on these lists so far, Akamoto is easily the smartest one. And the island has never before faced an army that's led by a tactical genius. That's a completely new thing for them. The cultists are very unorganized. They're not like a legit army. And they don't have a leader that can bring like structure and shit to their forces and go up against a trained military. So I think what'll happen is Akamoto will lay low, maybe recruit a couple of people here and there, build his military camp, start summoning his soldiers, and eventually when they get big enough that they become a threat to the bishops, and the bishops specifically try to send people after them, it'll be too late. By that point, his soldiers will be significantly stronger than regular cultists, because they will likely be demons at that point. And Akamoto is already, from the very start of the game, one of the strongest people on the island. Really, the only thing that would be able to stop him at that point is the bishops. You see, in the story of Cult and the Lamb, the bishops make killing the lamb their top priority because of a prophecy that was told that a lamb would take them out. So they constantly go out of their way to try and stop them. But outside of that, the bishops don't really care about anything that happens on their land as long as it's not specifically threatening their power. Like, they allow all kinds of wicked shit to happen. And there's a lot of people that are in the lands of the old faith that are not a part of the cults that they just don't care about because they're not a threat to them personally. People like Midas and Sozo and all these people, they're not serving the bishops. And the bishops don't really care that much. It's more so the cultists that go out of their way to kill the heretics, not an order that came down from the bishops. So I really think these motherfuckers are just gonna let this go for quite some time until it's almost too late. However, I think Akamoto is gonna run into the same issues that a lot of other characters on this list run into. He doesn't have that much hacks. Most of his powers and the powers of his troops are all like elemental and healing and summoning. None of them are like mind manipulation, soul manipulation, or anything like that. So while he's physically more than powerful enough to take on the bishops and eventually even the lamb if he's left alone for long enough, any one of them can completely out-hacks him. But this is where Akamoto's tactics, I think, will come into play. I don't think that Akamoto will put himself in a situation where he can be wiped out by the bishops. He has no intention of fighting them by himself. He never has before. He is a military general who uses an army to fight. And as long as he doesn't do anything stupid like rush into a war with an enemy he doesn't know anything about, which he's smart enough to not do, he will be prepared for whatever the bishops can throw at him. As long as he doesn't try taking the bishop's territory too soon when he's not prepared for it, and keeps himself surrounded by his very powerful units, to which the bishops could not safely appear in front of him to try to kill him without fear of death, he might actually be okay. The main issues he's gonna have is that he can't take down any of the gods permanently, because both the lamb and the bishops can just keep coming back again and again and again. That's what the new game plus of Cult of the Lamb is. After you kill the bishops, they come back, and then you have to kill them again and like put their souls to rest or indoctrinate them, one of the two. And Akamoto just doesn't have the ability to destroy their souls or do anything of that nature. He could put them down, but they'll just keep coming back and he'll keep having to fight them over and over and over again. And the bishops are actually capable of just teleporting right in front of Akamoto and then fucking with him really any way they want to, which is why he kind of needs to keep his army around him at all times. So do I think Akamoto will survive? Probably not. I think if the war goes on for too long, the bishops might just say fuck it, appear in front of him and kill him regardless. And then even if they do get put down the soldiers, they won't really care because they'll come right back. But whether they kill Akamoto or not, it really won't solve their problem, because you'll have an army of his soldiers that now have a bunch of shrines built all over the island where they can just keep summoning more and more. And you essentially have a new permanent force that you can cannot put down because they're going to be the strongest force on the entire island. And it genuinely doesn't matter how many of them you kill. And these soldiers will just keep eating skulls and becoming stronger and stronger and stronger until the only thing that can fight even an individual soldier is gonna be the top tiers of the island. It's gonna be like a fucking virus that festers and spreads across the land, with or without Akamoto's presence. And I don't know this for sure, but if Akamoto can use these shrines to summon his soldiers from the afterlife, can his soldiers use the shrines to resummon him? If that is the case, the bishop's only recourse is to indoctrinate Akamoto or destroy his soul in some way, which the bishops are never shown actually doing in the game. The lamb can do shit like that, but the bishops can't. So personally, I think this is probably the most fascinating crossover that's been on these lists so far. I kind of feel like it'll just turn into a forever war, where the bishop's forces are always on the back end struggling to fight against this other much greater force that even the bishops themselves can't really put down permanently. And I don't believe that if Akamoto is having this much issues with the bishops, that he's gonna go and try starting shit with the lamb. Akamoto is a conqueror for sure, but he's not stupid. And if he is capable of working with the lamb or using the lamb to his benefit, he will do that. And the lamb is known not to indoctrinate people who he sees use in. And I find it hard to believe the lamb will not see usefulness in someone like Akamoto. So I actually almost see a team up happening between those two. I genuinely believe Akamoto will take over the bishop's land, team up with the lamb himself to take out the bishops, and then he will just rule over the bishop's land while the lamb stays with his land, and he'll just stop there. I think he's smart enough to realize he will not be able to take on the lamb. Now maybe he'll plot and plan and try to figure out a way to take out the lamb, but if he can't figure out a legitimate way, I don't think he's ever going to rush into it. He might just call it quits after he takes over all of the bishop's territory. But if any of y'all have played Skulls of the Shogun, let me know what y'all think, because like I said, this is kind of a fascinating one. And that's it. We made it, guys. That's the end of part 2. Hope y'all enjoyed. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, share, do all that bullshit. And always remember, y'all be safe out there, you hear?